let's get into Iran. Now, this obviously we talked a lot about over the last so many shows, and I definitely think this is important for many reasons. Now, we're going to start with an important point of the reality that a lot of us have already been calling out of what the U.S. government is hiding. Now, even speaking to things like that, like the dishonesty of just, look, you could admit a level of tactician or tactics in the situation of not wanting to expose that you've been hit or that people have been killed. Right. I mean, just, but everything, sort of like unemotional, you could acknowledge why that would make sense. Because it gives them an up or makes them see that they're getting, hurting you. But understand that there's a different dynamic than just that. It's that Americans are involved and that we're promised, plenty of things by governments that never care about those things. But some of them people seem to believe that they're going to follow through. But the promises are there nonetheless. And about, for example, no new wars or peace or whatever. But then additionally, once it happens, well, no boots in the ground. Well, that's already happening. And so my point is that you get lie after lie after lie. And so one of them is that people aren't being killed. And we know that's not true, guys. So the fact that he's lying to you about Americans being killed in a war that he told you wouldn't start is not just dishonest, it's disgusting. And it's also disrespectful to the people who are sacrificing their lives, in some cases for things they actually think are helping people. And they're wrong, by the way. But my point is, as I've always said, some of them just don't seem to know that. Those that do, I don't think it's respectful at all, or I don't think it's honorable at all. But there are some who seem to still think we're fighting for freedom. And if that's really what they think, then what they're doing is honorable. My point, though, is that you're being lied to about when they go out there and die. You're being lied to about bases that are being destroyed. You're being lied to about what Iran is actually doing when it actually affects U.S. interests. That is not okay. And it is not just about him using tactics to manipulate Iran. It's because he's trying to hide that he's being hurt, that he is being affected, that their agenda might be failing. Now, this is the New York Times. Iran's attacks force, U.S. troops to work remotely. Now it says, this is from yesterday, Iran has bombed U.S. bases across the Middle East in retaliation for the U.S.-Israel war. Simple, right? That's exactly what happened. It was a unilateral, illegal attack with no justification, and they responded, forcing many American troops to relocate to hotels and office spaces throughout the region, according to military personnel and American officials, to which they'll still deny. Hegseth and Trump, and there's a weird little clique, they'll lie, right? But this is to be clear, guys, there's satellite imagery. Where was it? Well, this is the one, but there's been satellite imagery that's come out that shows you the blown up bases. And actually, I think it's the archive that's blocking them. It's behind a paywall. But the point is, sometimes the archive doesn't actually pop up all the images. But there are satellite imagery showing you the bases that they destroyed. And so they're hiding that from you. And what I think it shows in here, two things, is that there's a military and personnel that are admitting that, and that they're still lying about it. But on top of that they're moving to civilian locations. Just casually saying that. Now, there's two things to discuss there. One, which is that means in the minds of Israel and the U.S. and what they've told you since October 7th, at the very least, but more than that, that makes that a military target. It doesn't, as far as I'm concerned. It doesn't. The military using it makes that the military, they're the ones breaking the law. Now, the right response, if you're going to care about international law, is to accuse them of that and then have the international community make aware that they're using civilian locations with civilians in the buildings to conduct military personnel or military operations. That's a big deal. That's a crime. So my point, though, is that because Israel and the U.S. are right now bombing schools and hospitals, everybody everywhere can see it, despite the partisan media lying about it. Because again, this is not in Gaza. This is not an open air prison you control. This is the world that can see what you're doing. And the point is that they might feel justified to respond. Now, they haven't so far, not in the way that's just, indiscriminately bombing these locations, despite the lies, again, because you can see it. But in this case, as Iran has even pointed to, and then we just saw the discussion about them claiming to target tourist locations, which is not what he actually said. What he actually said is now what I think relates to this, which is really that we know where you are, and that ultimately we know that they're using these locations, whether they're in recreational or wherever else. Not the same as saying we're going to bomb them or that you're targeting tourists, which the New York Post very dishonestly framed. But I think it's important to think about, because if they were to bomb them, that would be in the same thing the U.S. government is doing, or at least claiming they're doing. And right now you are getting some of these allegations. Now it says Iran's their IRGC has urged people to report these new locations as it hunts for the dispersed troops. See, see how those connect now? But yesterday we talked about them misframing what the general had said. I think that's what they were talking about. And then that exposes a crime the U.S. government is committing. And it says and even if their bases were destroyed, it still doesn't make it legal for them to go and use a public civilian hotel. U.S. military officials say that threat is not stopping the Pentagon from carrying out the war with Iran, which is in its fourth week. It says he then repeated what has become a common refrain from his new briefings. This is from Hegseth. Every day, at the end of every one, apparently, today will be the largest strike package yet. Now, pretty sure we can prove that's not true. But what it shows you, like the idea that they've just continued to exponent, or I guess it wouldn't be exponential, but no, because exponential I think is, anyway, the point is that, if every day it's larger, I mean, every day it's growing larger, that means it continues to get larger and larger. And not just, like, let's say you have 10, then it's 15, then it's 20. And that's on top of what you, and my point is that's insurmountable, or I don't believe that's even possible. I think that at this point they would be we've already heard that they're running low on these things. And that is being shown to be the case. And yet he wants you to believe that every day is another larger strike package. That's just the example of them. Like, it shows you how insecure they are. You don't need to constantly be framing it as the biggest, best thing ever. That's what Trump wants. Isn't that just very transparent? But either way, let's just even take it at face value. The idea that is every day you're bombing more and more and more. These aren't military targets, guys. And he says, but it goes on, but the relocation of troops to makeshift, one official called them alternative sites, raised questions about Trump's administration's preparations for the war. Of course, they won't address the point of the illegality because that's not what people who are supporting the war do. But it says there were close to 40,000 U.S. troops in the region when the war started, which we don't talk about, and Central Command has dispersed thousands of them. It's also important to realize that, guys, like we've always shown you, the map of all the U.S. bases surrounding Iran and the troops surrounding Iran, and we're going to pretend like Iran was the aggressor. And it says some of them as far away as Europe, American military officials said, but many have remained in the Middle East, although not on their original bases. The result, according to the current and former military officials, is a war that is much harder to prosecute. So the indications from people involved and knowing what's going on are saying that it's making it difficult for the U.S. to conduct this war. Quite a bit different than we've won already and it's over, right? Quote, yes, we have the ability to set up expedient operation centers, but they're absolutely going to lose capacity or capability, said Master Sergeant Wesley J. Bryant, a retired special operations targeted specialist in the U.S. Air Force. He says, quote, you can't just put all that equipment on top of a hotel, for example. Some of it's unwieldy. The U.S. official said troops are not working from the roofs of civilian hotels. Nice follow-up. The point, though, is that they've lost capability. Like, you don't bulk. I mean, it's obvious. You don't explode these bases and force them to move into hotels and act like they're going to conduct the same war. And at least with the places that were destroyed, there's more than 13 bases, guys. But the point is that's a big deal that they're not admitting and is having an effect on what they're doing. Many of the 13 military bases in the region used by American troops are all but uninhabitable. With the ones in Kuwait, which is next to Iran, suffering perhaps the most damage, 6 U.S. service members were killed in a strike on Port Shuaiba that destroyed an Army Tactical Operations Center. We talked about that. I believe that was Douglas McGregor had said they took the eyes out, right? They're a very important tactical. That's the wrong one. The one in Qatar was the early warning system. That's the next paragraph. But they did get that, and it's a big deal because at $1.1 billion, if I remember correctly, it's a lot of money, and it's also important for their operations. Iranian drones and missiles also targeted Ali al-Shalim Air Base, damaging aircraft structures and injuring personnel, and Camp Buring, damaging maintenance and fuel facilities. In Qatar, Iran struck Al-Alud Air Base, the regional air headquarters of the U.S. Central Command, damaging an early warning radar system, which, again, he said they took out the eyes like it was a big deal. And it says in Bahrain, a one-way Iranian attack drone struck communications equipment at the headquarters of the U.S. Fifth Fleet. They don't report most any of this. At Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia, Iranian missiles and drones damaged communications equipment and several refueling tankers. An Iranian-backed militia in Iraq launched a drone swarm attack on an upscale hotel in Erbil early in the war. Iranian officials have even accused the U.S. of using civilians as human shields by putting American troops in hotels, which They are. I mean, we just heard that. And that's what U.S. people are reporting. So what's funny is Iranian officials were accusing them of this and being called liars, and now the U.S. elements are admitting that. And it says, quote, "We are forced to identify and target the Americans," the intelligence arm of the IRGC said in a message to people in the region. "Therefore, it's better not to shelter them in hotels and stay away from their locations." And it says, despite a punishing air campaign, the Iranians, quote, "still retain some capability." That's from the Dan Kane, General Dan Kane, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. So think about this, guys. This is from the Pentagon conference. Trump is out there and pegs that we won on day one. How embarrassing that is. And yet the general of the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff is saying that we're bombing them, but they still remain, they have capability. Now, he says punishing and they still remain to retain some. I think I don't think it's about some. I mean, clearly they have taken out plenty of ships. They've taken out plenty of, they control the airspace. But as I keep saying, if you care to look back before this started, that was expected, even by Iran, to a certain degree. And so the point was they planned for the long game, as they're, I think, proving right now. And I don't mean because it's the long game, but I mean that they're showing that they're not diminishing, that they continue to be able to strike through. And Trump keeps claiming they won or we made a deal, and then but you better make a deal. But you just said they made a deal. You know, we'll get to that in a second. It says part of the problem for the Pentagon is that 2 decades of war in Iraq and Afghanistan, war zones where the United States quickly established air superiority, left the military with facilities and headquarters close to the current front lines. Yeah, right, because they're surrounding Iran. And it says, and now the war in Iran has made all of these bases vulnerable to the point where service members can't really live or work there for extended periods, military officials said. The lack of better planning, some military officials said, also reflects a miscalculation on the part of the administration about how Iran would respond. Now, part of this is trying to frame this as sort of like the locations have made this hard to live at. But you have to understand, there are satellite imagery showing bases that have been bombed. And it says, the Trump administration did not reduce staffing at American embassies and other facilities in the region before the war started, or order departures for non-essential government employees and family members, nor did the State Department warn Americans to steer clear of the region until after the war began. Think about that for a second. Now, lack of planning, maybe. I mean, they in a way, they kind of admitted that in the beginning, but I think maybe that was sort of a way to hide behind that and not address the accountability. But this is something I just want to remind myself to, hold on, let me look at this real quick. On that point, I think it's interesting to think about. So what it said, the lack of better planning. So when I just wrote this for me, let me read real quick. Lack of better planning reflects a miscalculation on the part of the administration about how Iran would respond. The Trump administration did not reduce staff. Oh, it's what it wrote. So the point is they didn't reduce the staffing. The embassies and other facilities in the region, they didn't like remove people or give them warnings to move, nor did the State Department warn Americans to steer clear. Now, based on that knowledge, my thought, 3 things that seem the most logical is either they just didn't plan, like they're saying, which is possible, seems unlikely, but it's possible. Or the more dark possibility is that they wanted Americans to get killed. And this may not seem possible to some people, but if you understand this government and our history, it's not just possible, it's one of their options. And so the point here is to consider, like we said, with the ships that were brought out, right? That early on, people thought, well, they're just sitting ducks with what's going on. I think the idea was that they did this to hope that Iran would respond irrationally. They never do, it seems. But in this case, you put these things in position. You didn't tell people in the locale that they had to move until after it started. You didn't warn the State Department. All these things left people in vulnerable positions. So I think the hope was that maybe this would immediately cause that reaction, which would then guarantee support for the war. Iran's not stupid. Or they were of the mind that Iran simply would not attack the U.S., which undermines the whole point of how this all started, right? Well, we knew Iran would attack us, right? So you left them in the places where you said you knew they would attack. Any of those make sense to me, or a combination of them. It just speaks to incompetence or criminality and a lack of concern for American interests. Now back to the article. It says military officials say that American refueling tankers were rushed to the war with little time to orient or practice in the region before getting thrown into the round-the-clock operations. I mean, to me, that seems like an obvious example of lack of training, or that they didn't expect this to go the way that it went. And that might speak to Israel, like most people recognize right now. Even Rubio kind of let the cat out of the bag. That Netanyahu seems to have, in my opinion, convinced Trump that this was going to be a one and done. It's going to be a few days. Like, I think he said they're going to block the strait. They're probably going to kill Americans. We'll have the whole world on our side, and it'll be over like that, your legacy enshrined forever. And that's not what happened. And quite frankly, I think that that's what Netanyahu made sure wouldn't happen by bombing oil infrastructure and making sure this became a whole quagmire, which is what they've always done to the U.S. And I guess Trump just didn't know that, or he's not able to make that choice. I don't know. Those are my opinions, obviously. Now, as Ryan Rosbiani points out, the IDF chief of staff has warned about the possible collapse of the Israeli, or what it said. Let me make sure I didn't misread that. Yeah, okay, that's funny. IDF chief of staff warns army could. Okay, I'm sorry, I just misread the statement here. IDF chief of staff warns army could collapse into itself. So he's talking about the IDF. And just to cut to the chase, since I read that funny, the point is Haaretz is reporting that. And a lot of people just, you shouldn't take his word for it because he doesn't post anything. But I want to highlight that he is correct. That's where it's coming from. But what he's discussing is based on that article as well, that Iran is simply saying, like, look, you guys are being attacked. These bases are inhabitable. And simply saying almost as if they have a position of strength, right? And then today he's reporting that they're saying that they're essentially failing. Now, that's interesting to me, seeing as how Haaretz is reporting that. Israel losing sway over Trump on Iran war. And it says the IDF chief warned the army is nearing its limits as forces divert to other escalated fronts. And it says literally, as Haaretz frames correctly, Jewish terrorism in the West Bank, because that's what it is. It's not a secret. And it's not only because, the point is simply that this is exactly what we're talking about. Jewish extremists who are burning homes down in the West Bank and occupying territory. It's a reality. Now, it's important also to recognize, and this is from a Israeli platform, the Israeli human rights group that highlights in 2021 a regime of Jewish supremacy from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. This is apartheid. Now, the point is always to mention is that Zionism is not just about Judaism. Zionism is a manipulation of Judaism, but it does very much create that mindset, just like you can see Christian Zionist supremacists like Pete Hegseth very clearly. Point, though, is to recognize that what even Haaretz is highlighting is, one, that the IDF chief is admitting that they're nearing their limits, which I think they don't. I think they've neared those limits after on October 8th. My point, though, on top of it, is that I think it might be about them trying to act like, just say, basically create the situation where the U.S., as I predicted at the beginning, and as anybody probably saw coming who's been paying attention, is going to be the sole one to be fighting this war. And Israel stands by and watches. But then also rightly points out what's actually being focused on, which is their extremism in the West Bank and what everybody knows is a crime. So, as Scott Horton rightly points out, trust me, Benjamin Netanyahu, and as what this person highlights, nobody in the Trump administration planned, which is one way to look at it. Nobody in the administration planned for Iran to shut the Strait of Hormuz. Now, I argue the exact opposite. See, this comes from a position, I argue, where you think that they don't want these things to happen because they care about people and the interest. That's not true. If you've known anything about our history, you know the one thing is the government does not care about people. The point is that they would want it to shut down, so use that as justification for what they would do, in my opinion. And in fact, there's evidence to suggest that's what they planned. But he says nobody planned for that because of the way they acted, right? But if the plan was to make sure they did it, you would react that way to play the idiot, right? They would always rather be look incompetent than criminal, right? He says nobody planned for the sustained missile strikes on American bases across the Gulf. Again, you could argue that was the plan to make sure people got killed, and you could use the justifications. Nobody, and on top of that, the Gulf part of it, not the American bases, but the Gulf part of it. I mean, the idea there is about whether Iran would choose to bomb the elements of the Middle East. And I mean, I do think there was miscalculations here, to be very clear, or that Israel misled him. And it says nobody planned for an energy crisis. But again, guys, seriously, if you didn't think that they were aware that this would lead to exactly that, which everyone's talked about forever, I don't even know how it's possible. And it says nobody planned for Europe to look at Washington, shrug, and walk the other way. But it says nobody, it turns out, planned for very much at all. Read the account of how this war was decided, and you are left with one deeply uncomfortable realization. The people who launched it appear to have been genuinely surprised by almost everything that followed. Now, maybe if that's because Trump listened to Netanyahu and he was lied to, and it says the Iranians shot back, the allies didn't show up, the oil prices went vertical, all of it apparently was news to them. At least they said that, or, that's what it appeared to be. He said the opposite when you asked him down the line and said, no, we planned for everything. But it says, which leaves two questions so obvious, they're almost embarrassing to ask. What exactly did they think was going to happen? And did anyone in the room at any point think further ahead than the applause? That's a really good way to frame that, I think, especially with this administration. Now, the one what I want to highlight here is even the way this guy is framing this is this little graphic says Iran threatens second choke point and points to the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. I mean, really? Okay, so here's what's interesting. Iran didn't threaten any of this before they started this illegal war. And so what they were talking about was that if you keep conducting this illegal war against us, that one of the options we could take would be to shut your access down to the other side of this. But that's if they continue to be like right now, if the U.S. stopped what they were doing and Israel stopped bombing Iran, what they told you they would continue was their ability to restrict their access to the Strait of Hormuz. And what was the other discussion they had about but the simple point was they would not continue the bombing campaign. The war would stop. But you see, from Israel and the U.S.'s perspective, they can't allow it because they're in a weakness position right now. They can't allow them to have that control over just their access to a very important waterway. So this has now become a war of, it started as a war of aggression, but it's become now a war of necessity for the U.S. and Israel. And so they're kind of trapped. I think that's interesting. But to highlight it like this just seems dishonest to make it seem like it's sort of like the evil Iranian government, seeking to plan to control. I just don't believe that's the way. That's the way I might view the graphic. His statement up here is not saying that. Now, same kind of point here, and just for time, actually, where are we? That's not that long. Daniel Davis points out, this magazine cover tells you all you need to know about the U.S.-Iran war. And of course, it shows a hand with an Iranian ring grabbing a world map and holding it in his hand, right? And this is more so the point. The other one was more of my thought it was leaning towards. This one's very clear, which I think this is important to consider about how this is played right now. Or maybe even just that these are honest people that I would argue are missing a larger point, which is that, okay, like the corporate media, CNN rather, is like, okay, Trump's lying to you. And he is, but making the story so that he's doing this from the wrong direction, not necessarily that he shouldn't be doing it, right? And that's always how the corporate media plays this. Adversarial against parts of it, but we support the war, right? It's always. And so the same kind of thing is that in this, it makes it clear, as it says, President Trump routinely says, we have won the war and obliterated all of their capabilities. And of course it says, still Hormuz remains closed. It is not closed. And Tehran retains a death grip on the flow of 20% of the world's oil. So basically saying that Trump screwed us by doing this, starting a war of aggression. But then, of course, the perspective remains, it seems, that Iran is an evil terrorist organization that will take over the world. I just don't know. I mean, at some point, we have to recognize that it's not just their justifications. Like, why would they need to create lies to go after, if they were the terrorists, then they wouldn't need to create all these manufactured stories, right? It's like we have to start realizing that there's more than just the other side of the paradigm that we hate so much, but rather the entirety of the government has lied to us our entire lives about pretty much everything we deal with in some ways. And it says, because of that past malpractice in diplomacy, using talks as a cover to prep for military operations, which is what they always do, the Iranians will not listen to any proposals to end the war right now that do not advantage them. Of course. That's outside of the bad guy, good guy framing from anybody else, that's what anybody would do in that position. And it says, because of our war of choice, which is what it is, not we, but as Weather recently pointed out, but they, the government, not we, but same point, but because of their war of choice, Iran now has leverage, not only over the United States, but over the global economy in a way that would never otherwise have been in their hands. Now that's true. But it says, this is the bitter fruit of foolish and arrogant policies from our country. The grave problem now, however, is that we are at a moment where rational and sober reflection would lead us to finding a hat-in-hand solution to get the war over at any cost as soon as possible. But evidence is growing that we're going to do the opposite and expand our foolishness and expand the war on the ground. If there is a fire burning already in the Middle East, this could turn it into a flaming I don't know. Maybe I just read that with a certain framing of my mind. I get the sense that's kind of trying to frame it as, it's dangerous to allow Iran to have this control. A month of bombing Iran has achieved nothing. Will Donald Trump escalate? I mean, it's the image, I think, is what really does that. Like it's some kind of control structure. But either way, I think it's fair to point out the idea of why they, have created a situation that has put them, kind of like I was saying, in a very dangerous position that has now almost trapped them in a logic they might not have won in the first place. Now, talk about the deal conversation, which really is just something special, guys. This is the weirdest thing. The way that he's done this, again, like I said to start, I feel like again, it's all up in the air. If I had to bet on this right now, I feel like he's making the entire thing up. So, Donald Trump, in this recent clip, asks Steve Witkoff for permission, which, as everyone seems to have pointed out, is very telling. Asks him, am I allowed to say this? And he talked, but you could argue his deal and what I might expose, maybe because Trump always seems to, well, that's almost the point, isn't it? Trump just seems to always say things he shouldn't, and now he asks. It's interesting. But he asked about what the gift was. Let him tell you for himself. Remember, the story is that he was dealing with some secret defector from Iran and they offered a gift and to like prove that they were really who they said they were, and that they were the only ones that could do it. And then it happened, and it was oil and gas related, right? Well, here it is.
Very substantial talks going on with respect to Iran, with the right people. You know, I told you about a present, right? Steve, can I reveal the present?
You can do anything you want to say.
Thank you. They said to show you the fact that we're real and solid and we're there. We're going to let you have 8 boats of oil, 8 boats, 8 big boats of oil. This was 2 days ago. And they'll sail up tomorrow. That was 3 days ago. And I didn't think much about it. And then I watched the news, and they said, a very good anchor, actually, happened to be Fox. But I watched it, and he said, something's unusual happening. There are 8 boats that are going right up the middle of the Hormuz Strait. 8 big tankers are going loaded up with oil right through. And I said, well, I guess they were right, and they were real. And I think they were Pakistani flagged.
Yes.
And I said, well, I guess we're dealing with the right people. And actually, they then apologized for something they said, and they said, we're going to send 2 more boats. And it ended up being 10 boats. All right. I hope I haven't screwed up your negotiations, but I thought it was appropriate to say, because I did taunt you the other day by saying they're going to give us a present. And we're real and solid, and we're there. We're going to let you have 8 boats.
I mean, doesn't it just feel like he's making half of this up as he goes along? It's very strange. But let's get into the logic of this claim.
You can do anything you want to say.
Thank you. They said to show you the fact that we're real and solid. Oil. 8 boats, 8 big boats of oil. This was 2 days ago.
2 days ago.
And they'll sail up tomorrow. That was 3 days ago. And I didn't think much about it. And then I watched the news.
Okay, so he's told something. Like, this is really important. At least the story. It could all be an entire lie, right? That's one of the options. But he's told something. Saying, this will happen. Oh, I didn't think much about it. Okay, even though you told us, whatever, something's happening. So you did think something about it, clearly. At least you wanted us to think that something might happen. And then you told this. So it's important to understand that Donald Trump is not speaking to anybody. Donald Trump is being told this from Witkoff. That's undeniable at this point. Witkoff is the one relaying information from somebody they claim they're talking to. And he's being told that this might happen, at least within the story. So is it not one of the possibilities that this is a lie coming from somebody who's already been caught lying to Trump about numerous things that people in the inner circle of the diplomatic conversation have said Jared Kushner and Witkoff are basically Israeli agents? Direct quote. That's fairly possible, isn't it? Or that this is something that they're playing him with, or like plenty of these different options. Oh, and then they said, whoops, we've said something wrong and we'll give you 2 more. Okay. Well, another thing to add to this conversation is the fact that, as I know you've seen, and I'm glad I started making a big point about this. I wasn't sure if it would be as important, but the Strait of Hormuz has never actually been closed in the way they keep claiming. It just has not. It's right now, you can see all the traffic. Now, in regard to specifically oil tankers, it was restricted in plenty of ways. One, first of all, because I think the U.S. government and Israel scared everyone away from thinking it was going to happen. Iran, from the very beginning, as I highlighted, said that they lobbed the threats that we all saw in the beginning, and then they made it clear as he went on TV and he put out articles and said, this is closed to Zionists. This is closed to people who are engaging the war against us. And made a point to say, as I'll show you right now, like recently, as Spain was allowed to just go through the Strait of Hormuz, and it's being documented because it's already been happening before this, on top of the fact that what they're saying is, look, Iran keeps telling people, this is at the UN, non-hostile ships can go through the strait. And the reason they have to keep stressing this is because the only narrative out there is the strait's closed and the US and Israel are scary and threatening. And I argue even forcing people not to go through, my opinion. Why? To create this idea that this is so restricted. So back to the point, if he's telling you, then we looked and we saw 10 boats going through. Well, you mean aside from the other 1,000 boats that are going through, are we talking about the fact that you needed to argue it was shut down to pretend that there was some new thing happening? Like there's all these different anomalies to it, but I think it's interesting to even frame it as closed down when it's totally not. And Iran keeps telling people that it's not. And we can see ships going through that are not. Now, the question also becomes, is he just pointing to ships that were going through, like Spain, and going, see, like that's us winning because the deal went through, like I was thinking about yesterday, that ultimately it becomes sort of like they agreed not to have a nuclear weapon. So the deal worked and I won. It's over. Even though that was already where we were because they didn't have a weapon and they already agreed that the last time and the time after that. So in a way, he knows he's losing. So the argument becomes, let's pretend the deal is what we already have. And Iran will deny it, but I'll pretend they just don't want to admit it or whatever. All hypothetical. As it goes forward, we'll find out which one goes where. But you know what the track record this platform and a lot of the independent media has around seeing the writing on the wall here. So it ends up being 10 big boats of oil. Well, you know, there's only one small little problem with that. Ultimately, it turns out, Bloomberg says those tanker tracking data that they have shows that didn't happen. Of the 8, it says, tracking data since March 23rd shows no sign of the 8 boats full of oil that Trump says were gifted to the United States. Quote, if this was some great present, you'd think both sides would want you to know their own reasons. Don't you think? Yeah, you do. Well, of course, you could play into it and say, well, maybe this was a defector, but then wouldn't the Iranian government know that they just gave them oil somehow? Well, I don't know, man. It just doesn't really line up, does it? Kind of think he's making it all up. But on top of that, the absurdity, I'm kind of jumping ahead real quickly, but the absurdity of all this is that as we're in this conversation and he's telling you, I'm literally talking to a defector from Iran and I don't want to get him killed. And then the next day says, I'm in a 15-point plan to Khamenei's government. Okay, well, shoot, maybe he's doing it with both of them. That's, I guess, possible. But then it goes, okay, we're making a deal and they want a deal, begging me for a deal. The government, not the defector, but the government. Okay, that seems strange with what we're talking about. And you just publicly said you're working with a defector, which you know that they would hear. So that doesn't really line up either. But then we get to the point to where he goes, the sick Iranian leaders need to deal. Oh, you mean the ones that you want to make a deal with for peace where they can continue governing, but they're sick, deranged terrorists? That okay, but you want them there still and you make a deal? Okay, got it. And then the very next statement becomes, you better make a deal before it's too late. You better get serious. But you just said they made a deal. Didn't you just tell us that you were in the middle of that? Or didn't you say, my point is, guys, from one second to the next, what he's saying is contradicting the thing he said before. Like I've been telling you all these years. This one, Trump says the U.S. that U.S. will be Iran's worst nightmare if he doesn't agree to peace plan. You know, the one that he says they've agreed to already. Or Trump cast doubt on the prospect of a deal. Whoa. Hold on now. That got out of control really fast. Now it not even happen. But then didn't they just give you a bunch of oil? What? What's going on right now? And then Trump says it's up to Iran to convince the U.S. to end the war. Okay. Yeah, that's fun, right? That's an exciting little turn of nonsense. But ultimately, the problem is that you have a lot of people out there who just aren't paying attention, don't care. Not the majority in my mind. I keep saying that, but it's a lot of people who are framed as everyone in the conversation. So continuing, guess who reported? Holy crap, red light says Donald Trump just revealed that the Iranian leaders gifted him 8 points of oil. They apologized for something and sent 2 more. Right, because you just blindly report that as fact because Trump's never lied before, right? Literally. I mean, if you guys don't remember this, somebody just made this because I said that off the cuff. So I was kind of just referring to him as the red light, holy crap guys. And they just keep making that red light, holy crap. It's just weird to me, but that's what it's supposed to be. But the idea is it happened. We know because Trump yelled it out loud. Well, Trump says Iran let 10 oil ships through the Strait of Hormuz as a present. says Ron made the gesture to show the U.S., quote, the fact that we're real and solid and we're here or we're there. So at this point, though, okay, look, here's what's interesting. And I'm doing my best to be objective about this. It's kind of ridiculously obvious that he's lying about a lot of this. That's why I frame this as the faux negotiation. That very well could be with a real person. There very well could be some kind of deal going on, but it's still a completely broken, like he's lying to us all over the place because in the moment for moment point, they're contradicting each other. But as I said in the beginning, you could argue that's his tactic to get a good deal. Maybe you agree with that. But at the end of the day, he started this by telling us, or the point was the element he was talking to, he didn't want to get killed. Not the current government, who he said was irrelevant, who shouldn't be dealt with because they're all hiding in bunkers and then dealt with them the next day, which is what happened. Which, by the way, I didn't tell you, they denied, in case you didn't watch yesterday's show. He gave a 15-point plan to Khomeini's government, to which they immediately denied. And then he said they're thinking about it. They said, no, we're not. We're not even looking at it. It's embarrassing what's happening right now. But of course, it could all be a bunch of lies. The point is that after that, or before that, he said the defector guy was somebody who was secretly working with, trying to make a deal. He didn't want to get him killed. And then said that he was going to offer a present, right? That's how that story came around. So the so-called present was supposedly from this not Khomeini government person, right? That's not deniable because that's what he said. So then today we're being told that he's got 10 oil tankers that apparently come from the defector or whatever you want to call it, the person not in the current government that he's speaking with. So when we're talking about this today, I find it strange that it's kind of broadly being framed as that came from the Iranian government. And not in like just a broad general sense, but specifically the current Khomeini government. Now it says Iran, now that may be the reality, and maybe he just lied about that secondary part for who knows why. But it says Iran made the gesture to show the U.S. the fact that we're real, we're solid, we're here. Iran. U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, of course, a top negotiator with Iran, said in the cabinet meeting that the U.S. has had, quote, multiple reach outs from the region and others who want to play a role in ending the conflict. Now, look, we've already made this clear. Pakistan, Turkey, they've been playing mediator roles in this for a while, or kind of like secondary roles. And Iran made it clear weeks ago, we're done. We are not dealing with you anymore. Every single time you feign negotiations and you kill people. It's not, we're done. We're not playing this game anymore. That's what they said. Who knows if they changed their mind? But the point is that it's been shown numerous times they're trying to send information to the mediators through Turkey and Pakistan, like the one they did 2 days in through Italy that Iran denied, where Trump offered a ceasefire, as Israel reported, and they denied it flatly. That's why he got all angry and started killing people, and then he realized he's losing, and now he's trying again, it seems. But the point is that the people that are reaching out for all this are the people that have always been doing that. And Iran is already knowing. They say, we see the messages. Now, this is all just off the top of my head, but it's stuff that's been reported yesterday and the day before directly from Iranian statements. And what they're saying is, we see the messages. We see what they're sending. We're not responding. We are not engaging. And it says, Witkoff also confirmed that the U.S. had presented a 15-point plan, but noted it had been delivered via Pakistan. That was my point. And they got it. They said they saw it, but it was publicized, and it's ridiculous. Not only are they going, we're not going to engage anyway, but you could read through it, and I can give you 6 of those points that I can guarantee you they're not going to agree with. So, and also, it was presented to the Khomeini government. Now, it says Iranian state media on Wednesday reported that Tehran rejected the ceasefire that was presented to the Khomeini government and submitted its own list of conditions to end the war, which is 5 main conditions to which they already said they've been demanding, but it's in addition to what they said were necessary before. Now, see, the point is they were willing to have an actual agreement and have a discussion, like before with the JCPOA, which they upheld, that Trump removed himself from. And in this case, they made it clear with plenty of examples that they were willing to go forward with this, and they bombed them and destroyed that. So now, why would they give them concessions? They want to make that sound like they're terrorists and won't deal, except that's the exact opposite of what the reality is. So here, where they rejected the ceasefire and submitted their own demands, what they're simply saying is not, we want you to come to the table and talk. That's how Trump tried to frame that, because he seems desperate. And they made it clear, we're not talking. This is what we want. That's it. Until you give that up, this is where we're at. That's what they're saying anyway, to be clear. That could change tomorrow. Now it says, quote, that was 3 days ago. And I didn't think much about it in regard to the statement of giving him a present. But while watching Fox News later on, he claimed, that's what he just heard him say, they said something unusual is happening. There's 8 boats that are going up the strait. Guys, this is insane. So on Fox News. He happens to see that's happening in a strait, by the way, that's totally not closed down. And on top, I mean, I would love for somebody even to show me that Fox News report. He said he watched Fox News. Where's that report? Where is the evidence of that report? It might exist, but realize Bloomberg is telling you from the data that doesn't seem to be the reality. Seems pretty interesting, doesn't it? So if somebody could find the alleged Fox News report he claims he watched of boats going through, I'd love to see that, to be able to add to the conversation and see what it shows us. But I get the sense that he made it up, or that somebody else told him that who is lying to him. They said something unusual is happening. There's 8 boats going up the strait right now. And I said, well, I guess they were right and that they're real. I mean, really, that's all you need? Somebody that you don't see through somebody who clearly is has an allegiance to something other than U.S. interests, tells you that this is going on, and then tells you they see something happening that justifies that it's real. I mean, you're not even involved in that process. This is what I'm trying to show about everything. The military dynamic. This person seems like he's being completely manipulated. And again, that's not the same as saying he's, like the point of whether he was wanting to do this seemed clear to me. He was screaming about going to war with Iran in the beginning after the administration after the election. But there's also points to be made about whether he might, in addition to that, be played. And maybe just because I think Israel always seems to do that to U.S. presidents. But just think about it. Just ask it. Don't assume. And it says, and I said, yeah, well, I guess we're right. And I guess it's real. And I think they're the Pakistani flagged. Why does that make sense? So the argument then becomes that because they're the mediator, that Iran, gave them 8 boats full of oil for them to send. I mean, it's not, look, we could also point out that it's possible that Iran doesn't want to be seen as weak and capitulating, but gave them the oil in hopes that he might stop and maybe stop Israel. That's a possibility. I can see that making sense, especially in a world where Trump is starting to see that Israel is manipulating him. I mean, right. So like hypothetically right now, and this is always where it matters, is what happens right now. If suddenly Trump starts changing direction and starts slowing this down and starts, and I guess calls out that Israel won't, I doubt that happens, but that would seem to suggest that there might be a different agreement going on between Iran and Trump. And that's always what we need to consider, is that there are things that happen behind the scenes. Like we talked about in the past example, where the reporting suggested they essentially said, look, we'll bomb here, you bomb there, and we'll back up. And that's because both of them, I think largely Israel, recognized that Iran was at a more powerful footing. And they did that, though, and they stopped. Right? And I think they do that more than we think. Not because they're necessarily like on the same side, but that's possible, but because it's more about like in that moment, they both necessarily realize they want to stop. And now it says, they then apologized for something they said, and we're going to send 2 more boats. I don't even know why that makes sense. I mean, it's just, again, maybe there's more information that adds to it. So again, they say, no, didn't happen. There's no evidence. I mean, you have to realize, guys, that's what I'm showing you with that boat tracking app or the website. These things are tracked. He must realize that somebody somewhere is going to eventually be able to prove whether or not that happened. And then if you can prove that there were 8 boats that went through at the moment he said that or claimed he was watching some show, we should then be able to prove 1 or 2 things, or both. Were they Pakistani flagged? And if so, or I guess maybe 3, were they full of oil? And then 3, was it in any way connected to Iran? We'll be able to prove all those things to some degree. And I doubt we'll get there. Now, this I find interesting as well. Oh, it's this here, actually. And this is just I just randomly saw it looking down. This guy post this clip. Now, it just, you guys all know this probably because you watch this show and because you're objective and nonpartisan. But it's so obvious to see how this guy just kind of lies off the cuff. And, and you may even argue it's about like not like unimportant things. This is not unimportant. He's talking about the amount of ships that they claim they've sunk. But with all the lies we see, we should wonder whether or not he's even sinking these ships. I mean, I know they have. At least I think the evidence is clear. You could see that. Anything can be fake. But the point is that his number seems to change from day to day. Now, realize as it goes on, yeah, that would happen. But you'll note in the clip that it goes basically the first so many of them are the same statement. In the first 3 days, and the number changes. You either have to acknowledge that he's just making that up, or, he can't remember and he does it, same kind of point either way you look at it. And I think it speaks to exactly who he is.
It's gone. 24 ships in 3 days.
We've knocked out 42 Navy ships, some of them very large, in 3 days.
They have 32 ships. All 32 are at the bottom of the ocean.
So so right there, not 3 days, right? But he says they have 32. That's it. And they're all gone.
It's on the bottom of the sea. It's almost 50 ships.
Okay, yeah, now it's 50, right? So if they only had 34 and they're all sunk, it's weird how they suddenly now have 50 that are sunk.
It's just notified it's 51. The Navy is gone. It's all lying at the bottom of the ocean. 46 ships.
Oh, now it's all 36 and they're gone.
Can you believe it?
Can you believe it?
I mean, it's just, guys, there's no even denying that. It's just, and it's, yeah, you may think it's a small point. It kind of is in the larger sense of things, even though we're talking about people and chips and major, billions of dollars. Just pretty obvious, though, I think, with what we're dealing with. And if you think it's unique to Trump, you're not paying attention. So Brian Allen points out, Trump says, Iran, proposed to make me supreme leader. Now, there's a line here, guys, where it's just, like it starts to make me wonder, is he trying to make you see this? Now, I don't want to get too QAnon with it, right? We're too ridiculous. I'm not use the term conspiracy theory because that's not what that means. But realize that you start to wonder, this can't be what he thinks is what you'll believe. What Iran's saying, we want you to be the supreme leader, Donald Trump. And no, they're insisting. They want a deal so badly. Well, that's just not true based on everything we can see. Now, who knows? Maybe tomorrow he'll break the bombshell and show you it all comes down, and I'll happily report that. But as I always point out, up until this moment right now, the facts scream something else. And all the mainstream alternative media are not even looking at the facts. Has to show you something. Here's what he said.
Anything like we're doing in the Middle East with Iran. And they are negotiating, by the way, and they want to make a deal so badly, but they're afraid to say it because they figure they'll be killed by their own people. They're also afraid.
So what are we talking about? They random Iranians, or are you talking about government now? It's just you have to admit that there are elements of this that are undeniably lies.
They'll be killed by us. Badly, but they're afraid to say it because they figure they'll be killed by their own people. They're also afraid they'll be killed by us. There's never been a head of a country that wanted that job less.
And what does he mean? They're going to be killed by us, I guess, meaning that if they make a deal with you. I mean, that doesn't make sense. I guess what he meant was that we might kill the leader, but what he seemed to say right there was that they work with us either way.
They want to make a deal so badly, but they're afraid to say it because they figure they'll be killed by their own people.
They make a deal so bad, but they can't say it because they might be killed by them or us.
They're also
Makes sense.
Afraid they'll be killed by us. There's never been a head of a country that wanted that job less than being the head of Iran.
That really a clap-worthy statement? Trump's personal opinion about what he feels on the other side of the world? God, we're stupid today.
I don't want it. We listen to some of the things they say. We hear them very clearly. They say, I don't want it. We'd like to make you the next supreme leader. No, thank you. I don't want it. But I want to express my gratitude to the tremendous.
It just gets more ridiculous as it goes on. Trump says Iran begging to make a deal. That's today. So explain for me how you can be saying yesterday that they're offering a deal, right? That it's happening, or that the secret guy is, or now we're dealing with Iran, but then Iran denies and turns down your deal. But then today they're begging to make a deal. Now, look, you can argue that there's some level of a deal going on. That's possible. But for him to go, they're begging, it just shows you who he is. That's obviously not true. Based on the facts anyway, the evidence we can see, which is all we can do. The Iranian regime is now admitting to itself, he says, that they have been decisively defeated. They've got a disaster on their hands. They're defeated. They can't make a comeback. It's just cartoonish. Here's what he said.
We estimated it would take approximately 4 to 6 weeks to achieve our mission. 26 days in, we're extremely, really a lot ahead of schedule.
It's so funny, you can note the moment when he thinks, I'm going to go off the cuff. He's like, you can see his finger on the page. He's literally reading the statement and just kind of not barely into it. And then it's like he tries to go off the cuff, and then it seems like he realizes, oh, I can't even think right now. So I'm just going to go back to the page. I don't know what it is. It's funny to notice that.
We're really a lot ahead of schedule. The Iranian regime is now admitting to itself that they have been decisively defeated. They're saying to people.
How are they? Yeah, here's the ad lib. See? Oh, yeah, they're saying things to people and they're talking and stuff. That was needed to add to it?
This is a disaster. They're saying to people, decisively defeated. They're saying to people, this is a disaster. They know it. That's why they're talking to us. And they wouldn't talk otherwise.
You know, so they're saying it to people, are they? Except no one knows about that, and it's not in any documents. No one's saying it out loud. There's no video. There's no reports. But they're saying it to people. What people are you talking about, Trump? It's not true. Even if it's the actual reality of what they're thinking, they're not saying that to anybody, clearly, because it's not. But he just had to say that because he just needs to add his own little 2 cents, his own cent and a half.
But they're talking to us because they've got a disaster in their hands. They're defeated. They can't make a comeback.
Oh, really? Yeah. And meanwhile, they just bombed a lot today, just in case you missed that, which is true. It's just ridiculous. As Chris Martin rightly points out, Trump says the Iranian negotiators are very different and strange. These are the ones they just told you begged for a deal and we're already making one. They are begging us to make a deal, which they should be doing since they have been militarily obliterated. Wait, so you start by saying they're different and strange, and 30 seconds before this, he was saying that they're better hurry up and make a deal or they're going to be suffering, okay? And then next sentence, they're begging to make a deal, which they should be doing because they've been, well, you just said they were obliterated, which was zero chance of comeback. And yet they publicly state that they are looking at our proposal. Wrong. You're literally contradicting your own sentiment with this. It's just, this guy seems like he's schizophrenic right now. Wrong. They better get serious before it's too late. I mean, you feel like he starts by saying they're begging for a deal, then ends the very paragraph with saying they better get serious before it's too late. As Chris rightly points out, I mean, I think we all have to admit there's something especially stupid happening right now. Stupid is not even the right word. Like it's unprecedented, the level of whatever we call this right now. And Chris says, counterpoint, the militarily obliterated country of Iran hit multiple military bases last night, most of which are truly obliterated and rained missiles down upon Israel. True. But, who cares? Facts, right? CBS or CNBC. Trump says Iranian negotiators better get serious, that's the paragraph I just read for you. Trump lashes out at the sick Iranian leaders that he otherwise wants to keep in power with a peace deal, because that totally makes sense. Trump says U.S. will be Iran's worst nightmare if it doesn't agree to the peace deal that it says they're begging for, because that's just normal, right? Cast doubt on the prospect of the deal that he just said they were absolutely screaming about. And, that it's up to them to convince us to end the war that I'm telling you I want to end because they're making a deal. But they have to convince me of the things that I'm telling them. It just doesn't make sense, guys. You can make a joke about it all day long. It's very serious because people are dying. People are literally starving to death. They're being tortured all over the world in multiple locations that this war, because it is the same war, is taking place. Gaza, Syria, Lebanon, all of it. Now, as he wrote today, this is 3:30 p.m., after all the different schizophrenic statements, as per Iranian government request, he writes, please let this statement serve to represent that I am pausing the period of energy plant destruction, the war crimes that those would be, by 10 days to April 6th. Talks are ongoing, and despite erroneous statements to the contrary by fake news media, the others are going very well. Oh, so you're absolute what's the word he used? Just, shall not be moved. Deadline was just moved for 10 more days. Got it. These attacks on energy, that would be crimes. Okay. But this gets even more ridiculous when you find out that they're denying that. Now, this is different than some secret other Iranian person. Now, of course, Iran can be making this agreement and then lie about it. That is possible. But what logic does that make? Especially when Iran is the one saying they want this to walk back, and especially when Trump claims that's what he wants. And then you argue that you guys come to an agreement about actually waiting, and then they deny it? Guys, it's not happening. I don't see a world in which that even remotely makes sense unless Israel's lying to Trump through Witkoff or whatever else it might be. Jeremy Scahill says, I asked a senior Iranian official about Trump's claim Iran requested an extension on the threat They said Trump is not being truthful. We have not submitted any request regarding potential U.S. attacks. Now, that's what Jeremy says. He said somebody said to him. Then the Wall Street Journal came out and reported, citing mediators involved with the deal, which is important because they're the ones that keep calling out Witkoff and Jared Kushner as Israeli assets. Says Iran has not requested a 10-day pause on strikes on its energy plants, contradicting Trump's claim that the extension was made at Iran's request and confirming earlier reporting by Dropsite News from Jeremy Scahill. This just gets ridiculous by the second, guys. So it's very clear to me that what makes the most sense, again, it's hard, we're reading limited information, is that Trump is so desperately trying to frame this as his magic deal-making ability is driving this into a resolution. And in any other circumstance, I'm willing to bet you that Iran would have just let it happen because they seem to not care. They let Trump pretend he's the big tough man saving the world when everyone seems to see through that. And in the past, they've let that go. Like I said, after the 12-day war, they came out the winner in that situation. Despite all the lies, they didn't obliterate the thing. They did get the enrichment facility, but the point is clearly that they got through a lot to Israel. And so they let it go. They let it end. And they even made statements to some effect, right? But because of what they did and because they kept pretending deals and murdering people, they're done with this now, at least what they said up until now. So Trump comes out and goes, okay, he wants to end it now, wants to fake some kind of a deal that makes him look like he got the deal. And Iran says that's not happening, which is probably really pissing him off. Now, either he's lying about it and he's mad they're not going with it, or he believes that this is actually happening because somebody's lying to him. And now he's confused. Here's what the New York Magazine put out. This was today. Does anybody take Trump seriously anymore? Now, people are going to yell partisanship because usually that's almost always plays a factor in this stuff. But, it's a real question we should be asking. Not because of partisanship or because of one thing, but because he just is to an objective person who's not being led by politics, where that rarely exists today. You just can see that he's lying, guys. It's obvious. He's contradicting his statements, right? So at some point, people go, okay, even people who are in the higher level that pretend he's not, they still know he's lying, right? So at some point, you just start treating him like he's not even real. He's not a serious person anymore. And it's just interesting. But this goes through just kind of the recap. You can read it for yourself. Now here is Alex Jones coming out yesterday saying Iran rejects the peace plan. The peace plan. You mean the plan that was literally designed to turn them into some vassal state with no ability to defend themselves, where Israel would 100% take advantage of them and the U.S., like with Libya? That's the peace plan Iran rejects? Or was it the plan they tried to put forward that they never accepted and they bombed him in the middle of? This guy's ridiculous, guys. And they vowed to keep the Strait of Hormuz closed indefinitely. You know these things because you're watching this show, because we've been continually reporting on it, because that's not true. Not only did they not vow to keep it closed, they didn't close in the first place. What they said was they will continue to restrict their access if they continue to conduct this illegal war and do not give them the basic concessions they're asking, which is basically no sanctions, no illegal wars, no more, everything they're doing illegally. This is what he's putting forward, guys. And of course, what he gives you the token where he pretends to be mad about Hegseth saying we negotiate with bombs, but then still supports everything they do because that's what honest people do, right? I simply said, do you ever get tired of being so deliberately dishonest? Probably not. Chris Mann points out what Sean Hannity had to say. He says Trump should only make a deal with Iran if they repay us for all the cost of the bombs. I don't even have a word strong enough or accurate enough for what in the hell that is. So, whether you think the war was justified because of Iran terrorism, that you're going to literally bomb the hell out of a country, killing civilian people, which is just, you cannot deny that. And then argue that you won't stop it until they pay for the cost of your bombing. But that then weirdly means that they will still be there, which he says they won't allow. So this just seems like I think it's just kind of honestly, people like Hannity, if you want to cut to the quick of it, I think is trying to give Trump the path to whatever Trump needs. Has nothing to do with the real agenda. These people are career players, guys. But I'll let you listen to it yourself.
A deal with Iran and a permanent lasting end to this conflict, that would be a major win, not only for the U.S., but for the entire world, but for a deal to work. work with Iran, certain straightforward conditions must be met. One, Iran must agree to hand over all of that 60% enriched uranium.
Oh, yeah. Like they agreed to already, right? Like we showed you, which I'll include again, which you can read for yourself, which was outlined in the deal that they blew up when they bombed him on the 28th. He had a conversation on media right there with, was it Face the Nation? The foreign minister of Oman made it clear. They agreed to give up all of their rich material and to literally no longer even have it anymore, which they've never done before. And he said, this is actually happening. We're actually going to have peace. And Israel bombed them that night. So is Hannity that stupid? Do you think he's not capable of doing his due diligence? I don't know if he would or if he cares to, but I know he can. So ask yourself, is this journalist just ignoring the facts, or is he just lying, or is he just not aware of it? Or the fact that the enriched uranium was within the safeguards, which he'll continually pretend is not the case, which I'll include here with a little, where was it? Shoot, thought I'd grab real quick. There it is. I just did this so you guys could have like a one-stop spot for it, because I bring it up often. Here's the link to I'll come back to it, of what, Witkoff's lie about 60%, which is all going around still, despite how easy it is to prove was actually within their safeguard agreements. Because remember, Witkoff claimed they bragged about it like it was some kind of violation, like they would even do that when they're coming to a table about some kind of an agreement. Like this guy is so dishonest, but the word coming to mind would be, deliberately, not just kind of like ultimately the main thing to realize is against U.S. interests. There's a lot of factors to include in that, but that it is something obviously hurting Americans and our interests. And these are the people that are the middleman between the conversation and Trump.
They must do so immediately. They must do it, by the way, in a way that we cannot allow that material to get into the hands of the wrong people. All of it must be turned over before our military leaves.
Oh, to who? To whom? To the U.S. government? To the Israeli government? Then totally the not wrong hands, right? The only two governments that are actually seemingly willing to use them on people for no reason. But yeah, rush it out of the hands of the people who told you they'll never do it and have never been proven to do it, and for religious reasons say they'll never do it, and the IAEA says they never have. Get it out of their hands and rush into the hands of the people who are killing people right now with all those weapons, because that's the safeguard.
Number two, Iran must allow anywhere, any place, anytime inspections, not from any globalist organization like the IAEA that always screws it up, gets it wrong, always in Iran's favor.
Oh, see, okay, totally not at all, by the way. They've been aggressive against Iran for a very long time. The only difference is they just never argued that they were doing the thing that they're not doing. And he just hates that, apparently. The facts, or Tulsi Gabbard, or the previous administration, or everybody anywhere with any insight tells you they are not doing so. The evidence doesn't back it up. And how many times you can show Israel getting caught? Literally, one example I remember, getting caught trying to sneak material in with the IAEA inspection and being caught in the bathroom and then going in and testing and finding material on the bathtub, the toilet. Can't talk. Now, that was reported. That came directly from the IAEA. They said there was ultimately radioactive, somebody flushed it down the toilet. I mean, this is crazy. This is the kind of thing that they do constantly to try to frame Iran. Now, that's off the cuff. Don't take my word for that. But I've covered this previously, and that was directly from the... you could even go back to, what is it? Was it Amman? Man, it's frustrating. Amman. I'm forgetting his name now. The Japanese person that previously was in the position and ultimately mysteriously died from some turbo cancer that came out of nowhere. I mean, and he was critical. He was calling out Israel for claiming they were doing. I mean, it's just crazy, the history. But anyway, the point is that you can't argue this group is somehow pro-Iran. They've been very aggressive towards Iran, and they've shown data to back up what they're saying. These people are belligerent and just argue that is the case no matter what the facts show. And if you disagree with me, then you're on the other side. That's not journalism. But the idea that there has been inspections, even from U.S. entities, and the U.S. and elements have already told you they're not doing that. What he wants is the current elements who are very clearly willing to lie about everything, and Israel will go right along with them. It's not going to happen.
No, they've got to be U.S. inspectors. Iran must also fully agree to end its nuclear program completely once and for all.
Yeah, so that means their civilian level, which everyone's allowed to have, included. So is the other one as well, but that's not legal. And they've always had that. And by the way, again, literally already argued they would before Israel bombed them on the 28th. So this is just stupid.
They must also agree not to build out any ballistic missiles.
Right. So no defense. Well, there's plenty of other things you could add, but that's the whole point. Just no missiles, no ability to defend yourself. But that's what they've already added to this, right? And it doesn't include here. They've talked about, as we just read to you a second ago, no Navy, just basically a group of people stuck on land that Israel can manipulate however they want.
They must also agree to open up the Strait of Hormuz.
Not closed.
And they must agree to repay America in oil for the entire cost of this entire military operation.
Oh, well, isn't that interesting? Almost like they spoke about it, and now they're reporting something that they included that then Trump claims already happened. You see what I'm talking about? Whether it even happened or not, it's almost like they're making it look like something has been fulfilled, and so he's going to go, we did it. I weirdly get the sense that might be where this goes, like almost out of desperation. But that's, the idea that they're going to repay you for your illegal war is just the stupidest thing in the world. But Hannity has been a career war, belligerent. He's a warmonger. He always has been. These people are always screaming about why war is necessary against people that we have no right to be involved with. Like everything about this is just disgusting from top to bottom. Even if these groups were what they claim, the point is also still to be made that why we feel we have the right to do any of this anyway. But on top of that, that they're lying about them, which should matter, right? Now, here's what he said in another post. And again, that I really recommend, if you haven't seen it, that you understand what this is discussing. On the 28th, like literally the hours before they bombed illegally Iran, where you said peace was in reach, that they said they were going to give up all of their rich material. And they you could argue they lied about it, but the ultimate point is they're now demanding it. And here's the real thing to always remember is when Trump says they wouldn't say the one thing that mattered, that they refuse to give up a bomb. Well, that's not true. In fact, when he said that, at that very moment, they were saying, we're already okay with it. We're agreeing to give it up. So again, you could argue that they think they're lying, but why would then Trump come out and say they just never have, they refuse to say it? It's not the same thing. It's clear. And then now he's coming out and saying they agreed to not have a nuclear bomb, but then refused the ceasefire. I mean, he's lying about all this. I don't see any other option. At least the idea of some, either misled or lying would be, I think, a fair point. So here's what Sean Hannity also said, which just blows my mind.
Tonight, Sean, the president has also approved the
That guy
deployment
looks so strange.
of
Weird.
up to 1,000 soldiers from the 82nd Airborne in the Middle East. And it's believed that if there's a necessity to have ground forces, say, take Karg Island, this might be the first step toward that contingency. Then again, you could argue that maybe...
Yeah, I love that. I don't know, Karg Island, whatever. Like this, I don't know that one. Clearly, it's either like there's a point people made, by the way, that it could be that that's something they want you to think, and it's a different island. But Robert made that case in the article. Any one of these things they're going to go for will ultimately be a failing action with what Robert argued with what they'll ultimately do in response. And I agree. But so Karg Island, though, is one of the thoughts I had about whether he's talking about sort of justifying taking that for the oil conversation.
It's just another way to apply more pressure. We'll keep an eye on it, but for now, back to you.
And the most important aspect, Kevin, is obviously that
the most important aspect is to always blindly repeat this untruthful statement at the end of every show.
We will not be handing off to our children and grandchildren a world where radical mullahs that chant death to America, the number one state sponsor of
unlike saying, death to Muslims, which is totally okay, which is all over Israel and apparently the Republican Party today. That's okay, though.
Terror has weapons of mass destruction. Mullahs that chant death to America, the number one state sponsor of terror.
Number one state. And he's like, yeah, exactly, man. Yes. We all repeat those lies. We got it. Number one state sponsor of terrorism, even though you tell us ISIS is the leading terrorism group and they attack Iran, but whatever, or that every other terrorist group we can even point to is Sunni and comes from the Wahhabist Saudi, but whatever, Iran does it because we say so. Because, you don't we claim they're supporting this group, which you can prove they're not? Hamas, Hezbollah. It's just like I'll say every single time. You take every allegation they make and pretend it's all true, even though it's not. And compare that to what you can literally prove, even though it's way more than that, of what the U.S. has done in the world. It pales in comparison. But they just do it anyway, guys. Leading state sponsor of terrorism. It's just lazy. There is no evidence to back that up.
has weapons of mass destruction.
Does not. You know what I mean? Like, here we are again. WMDs. We're going in to get them.
That could potentially create a modern day Holocaust.
Oh, a modern day Holocaust. You mean like what they're doing in Gaza right now? No, not that. These are cartoons, guys. At some point, hopefully, the world will get to a place where we can look back and just be like, "Wow, did this ever happen?" Like this is what it looks like at the end of a dying empire. Like these people are cartoons. It's just sad. I mean, look, think about end at 2008, for example, right? What did you see? You got all of the big time, super important government supported economists saying we've never been stronger than ever, and then everything collapses. That's the same point. It's exactly what we do every time, or what the power structure does. And half the time, those people thought they were right because they bought into the nonsense, guys. It's like the Iran experts who are experts on all the lies the State Department teaches them, and they don't even know that they're wrong. Patrick Henningsen has a good point here about the lies from the point of the protests, which we're already well into this, but let's not forget they lied about Iran shooting protesters. They manufactured this which, by the way, we've already now proven in 3 or 4 different ways from reporting from inside Netanyahu's camp, the New York Times article that covered it, the idea of them arming the Kurds, the statement of the date they made before they got there. They planned this out. They stoked the fake revolution. Now realize that was rooted within a real protest. That very quickly they called out, including the union supporting it, as outside forces that had taken over it right in the beginning. So as usual, they try to co-opt something real. It didn't work, just like last time, but they just bull rush in with violence and just yell the narrative. They do it every time. And so the reality was very, very clear. They just killed people. And my point was they admitted, they armed them. They told you they were arming them. In what world is that not obviously a crime? And so Patrick Henningsen has backing this up with evidence and research about what he saw and the reality of it.
Also met with the police and saw the evidence of the riots and the foreign agent provocateurs, that incendiary element that was injected into the country by U.S. and Israeli intelligence. What happened was terrible for the police. Hundreds of police were killed. Many were burned alive. We saw the unredacted evidence of that. The redacted evidence, of course, was much of it was broadcast on Iranian national TV. But you didn't see any of that syndicated in the Western.
Yeah, wonder why. Isn't it also funny that you have people who are always about support the police who suddenly don't care when it's just police with a different color skin?
Media. So I can say categorically that the narrative that Iran massacred thousands of its own people and these peaceful democratic protesters is a total fiction. And I saw plenty of evidence to that effect, as well as reams of burned buses, burned fire trucks, EMS responder vehicles that were set on fire, aside from the police that were burned alive. So there was a real agenda there to foment instability and unrest. And then the president, Trump, then taking to the airwaves saying, this is your moment, rise up and take over your institutions. It's obvious that was incitement. So for anyone to say that that wasn't a classic color revolution, exactly as we saw in Homs in Syria in 2011 and in 2012, exactly as we saw in Maidan in February 2014, and also in Libya, Serbia, Yugoslavia, the list goes on, Eastern Europe, Belarus. We've seen this playbook. That's what happened here clearly, but it was done on a level with resourcing that is quite breathtaking in terms of what was spent on the media propaganda campaigns in the West, what was spent in terms of Starlink terminals that were smuggled into the country.
Every time. I've been telling you guys that. It's not hard to see. Starlink, he's a military contractor is what it is, but they always give you the feigned, what it's for. We're helping humanitarian. I mean, there's so many examples where people suffer in this country. Even isn't it funny how when Biden was in power and you have the hurricanes, how they just couldn't stop talking about how no one's being helped. And now they just don't care. No one's being helped. There's been disasters where no one's being helped at all. No Starlinks, no help. Just such gross hypocrisy, just feigned humanitarianism, whatever it is. And Starlink comes into play every time the U.S. is in conducting an illegal war, which they all are, but war in general. And very clearly, you can see, I don't mean that by, you take it however you want, but the point is that all their wars are clearly no congressional approval, whatever. But the point is that you're using these things as weapons of war under a guise of humanitarianism. It's what they do.
We also saw evidence of narcotics that were being distributed. And I saw that in Syria, by the way. I was really interested in that point because how do you get people to act completely insane and violent? We also saw this with ICE.
I think that's the Captagon, if I remember correctly, was the name of the drug. Tell me if I'm wrong in the chat. But that's the conversation. We did talk about that in regard to Syria, where they were giving people these amphetamines and different things to, and his point there is to drive them to be, to kind of, I guess, maybe immoral, like, so, drugged up and not aware of what they're doing. Certainly possible.
This elements as well. The police there believed there were amphetamines, similar types of drugs, and spice, something called spice. These types of drugs were also
Heard that spice. That's that stuff that made people like rip their faces off or whatever. Like legitimately, like the people like lost their mind and like scrape their skin off or whatever, and like bath salt kind of stuff. Remember, and same thing. Remind me in the chat if you have any more information on that. It's interesting. What where was that spice story from?
distributed and injected into that. So there's a lot of disaffected youth, obviously, that got swept up in the mob violence with very skilled and well-trained people in the back lines shooting police officers from within the crowd, using the crowd as human shields. And that's when things spun out of control very quickly, and we saw that sort of period of about 7 days of violence and instability, which the U.S. and Israel hoped to capitalize on, but didn't after the Iranians shut off the internet, intercepted a lot of the Starlink transmissions, were able to track the location of some of the terminals, and quickly were able to shut down the organizational, I think, element. That's the impression I got from the police chiefs that we met in the main municipality of Tehran, and the visual evidence that we saw as well. Why is this important? This narrative, the regime or the mullahs massacring their own people, that's the actual backstop for manufacturing consent for this war, because the nuclear conversation has fallen flat on its face.
Yep, exactly. Patrick Henningsen, 21st Century Wire. Just looking that up really quickly, I was actually conflating that with two things. It's rightly pointed out, I think it was K2. It's like the synthetic marijuana, which, if you remember correctly, there was tons of like crazy stuff. People just went like lost their, like there was chemicals sprayed on it. Excuse me. And it caused people to like lose their minds. But the ripping of the face thing is actually a real story, but that came from two things. Flocka, you remember that? And then the bath salts conversation. I think all this is kind of part of the same, not to get off on this tangent, but this part of a similar conversation. It's like experimentation almost. Like there's something, you could argue it's just people trying to make new recreational things, but something tells me, especially when you look into the history of where these things tend to really originate, it comes from a lot of times military stuff. Whether like the acid, or what's the other one I was thinking of? Like MK Ultra kind of stuff. I mean, that's a lot. That's a history that you should look into. So the point of what we just said there was that they lied, about the background of that. And he went and saw it for himself. That's what a journalist does. Murray says, I won't be lectured on morality by the guy who had the CIA draw up plans to kidnap and assassinate Julian Assange and exposing American war crimes in Iraq. That's Mike Pompeo saying the vast majority of Republicans, that was confusing for the podcast. I'm all over the place right now. So Mike Pompeo said the vast majority of Republicans understand that Operation Epic Fury, what they're doing now, is righteous and necessary. Let's finish the job. Murray says, I won't be lectured on morality by a guy who had the CIA draw plans to kidnap and assassinate Julian Assange. And the CBS poll he's highlighting says Republicans want Trump to end the Iranian regime, change Iran's leaders to one that are pro-U.S., 80%. I don't even think that's true. Most everything I can see is based on some select grouping of people in the core. The reality of the conservative conversation, or even just Republican GOP, I think most of them, they ran on the idea of this not happening. I just don't believe that's the reality. But on top of that you're talking about, even if it was, change them to be pro-America, pro-U.S. How did we get here? Now, let's be clear. That's always been what they've been doing. Always. Fighting for fruit companies in South America. But the point is that they've framed it as humanitarian or whatever, at least for a long time now. And the idea that we're just so casually saying, let's just remove them and put people there that we like. That's what it's always been, guys, but they're just doing it on its face now. And that's just destined for failure, guys. This is going to cause things to spin out and get, you could even argue that the illusion, it did afford some level of like a feeling of normalcy or peace. And that's not a good thing ultimately, because we're being lied to. My point though, is that with what they're doing now, it's just very clearly, again, I would add though, that seeing it is that there's an opening there. It gives us the opening to go, okay, wow, they're doing this. We should do something as Americans or wherever you're from. We need to stop that. My point though, is that they're doing it on its face. And my worry is that it's going to turn this into, well, that's just what we do. Because there's far too many people who seem to be all kind of pulled into that mindset today. We can't, this is wrong. And then what they're doing is, I mean, on top of that, realize that Iran's leaders and what they're doing, and there's just not the truth they're telling you is not true. So now you're driving it based on the lies from the very kind of oligarch globalist that you think you're fighting. So Rod points out that they're now just copying The Onion. This is an Onion article from a while ago. Netanyahu calls Iran strikes necessary to prevent the war he just started. That's a joke. Here's the report from March 25th. Senator John Kennedy on Iran. The president didn't start a war. He's trying to stop a war. That's just dumb, guys. That's stupid. Obviously, you could argue that starting the war might have stopped a bigger war. That's a logical way to say that. I don't get it. On Arbitrand. The war to reopen the thing closed by the war, where they say Pakistani defense ministers talking about the war is about trying to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, which again is not actually closed unless you're fighting Iran. It is closed for you if you're fighting Iran. Well, what's interesting to me is that how in the world are you going to, as Arnaud's rightly pointing out, you start the war illegally, which causes them to restrict the strait. And then you now frame the war as to start open the strait. Like, it just obviously shows you that they're either clearly failing and now, trailing after this, or that this is just them trying to mission creep in a way and change the narrative. But either way, they started it. They created the very thing they're now fighting. As always, guys, that's always what it's been. Look at every other war before us. And coming to this point again, Spain has been granted permission through the Strait of Hormuz, which is not new. Like I've been saying, they're making a public case of saying, yes, look, you could guess, you're good. You guys can go through. Why? Specifically due to their position on the war. Because they've made a statement. They've made it clear. I forget if they've said something more severe, but at the very least, they're saying we're not involved. Like, we don't want any part of this. We don't want to support what Trump is doing. But I believe they did make some statements that were sort of like, this is not, I don't want to misquote it, but the point was, at the very least, I know they did make statements saying that we're not involved. And so because of that, Iran's saying, yeah, you're good. Go through. Which my point is, the more this becomes real and seen, and other governments start to recognize that they're being misled by, if that's really what's happening, or at the very least, it just starts being a necessity because people need to get this flowing again, and Trump's plan is not working, that this is going to make Israel and the U.S. in a terrible position, but in a way that creates the justification for them to push this even further. But either way you look at it, Iran is playing this very artfully. Spain, that same point, granted, that it says, even as Trump's energy dominance policy is failing. Let's just be clear about that statement. This is not about some kind of, praising Iran's government. It's about the reality that the tactics they've used are clearly working. It's the same point about with Putin and the statements about the way he conducts his politics. He's a very, very masterful politician. That's obvious. And he constantly plays these people in ways but that doesn't mean he's a good guy, not even remotely. But that's important to see. And it's also important to highlight that the difference from what we're staring at with Trump and them is that they're also just as dishonest, but they're also just terrible at doing what they're doing. Now, this is another article from Al Jazeera, Strait of Hormuz, which countries' ships has Iran allowed safe passage to? Now, you can go through this. The simple reality is, like I'm saying, here's what's crazy. They keep trying to tell you that it's closed. No one can get through. But India, Turkey, China, France, Italy, Spain, and really anybody not adversarial to them right now. It's pretty simple. They just really need you to think it's closed. And all of the dutiful liars out there keep telling you that it's closed. Iran tells UN non-hostile ships can go through. Now, you could argue they're lying and trying to trap people, but no, there's already evidence showing ships going through. Now, back to that point about Trump, is he just trying to pretend that that's what he was doing? I'm not sure. And here's an interesting point. We mentioned this recently the other day. That this was new to me as well. I wasn't actually aware that all these different straits, Suez Canal and what was the other one that was the one main one, like the Panama Canal, for example, or the different straits. Almost every one of them in the world charge fees for ships to go through. That does not happen on the Strait of Hormuz. Now, you could argue it's because there's basically two, halfway on the other side, there's another landmass that could arguably try to control it as well. But that's not the reality. Iran very clearly controls in a security sense the Strait of Hormuz. That's why they've always been trying to change the dynamic, because they knew Iran could do this for years. This is the point. So it's always been the case. So understanding that Iran has security control over this area means that just like every one of the others, that they would have the right to claim to have a, what does they call not a fee, but what's it called, a fee in here? The a toll. That's what it is. Charge a toll for going through. Now, I'm not even saying I agree with it or not. I'm just saying as a worldwide thing, it's odd. It's sort of like missiles and everything else, right? Iran can't because Iran bad guy. Well, that's not how that works. Okay. And ultimately they would have that right. And so what Drop Dudes is saying, Iran's parliament has moved toward formalizing the plan to charge a toll. And that was actually part of one of the things in the 5 points they demanded to make go back to some state of peace, or rather just not peace, but the security footing and the restrictions specifically for Zionist Israel and the United States from the Strait of Hormuz. They already made it clear they'll stop militarily engaging if they stop. But they said they would say, we're not stopping with this because of what you just created until you give us that, if that makes sense. And so the point is that one of them was sovereignty over this control point. And it says the head of Parliament's Civil Commission said Iran is pursuing legislation to formalize that sovereignty and control and supervision over the strait. My point, watch, it's a prediction. Now watch as the usual suspects frame this, and maybe it's already happening, as either unprecedented somehow, even though it's clearly not, or an act of terrorism, even though it seems to be common practice just about everywhere else. That's just how this broken partisan game seems to work. Caroline Leavitt comes out and says, allies are lining up behind Trump to open the Strait of Hormuz. The strait that's not closed at all. Well, it's restricted, but closed is not at all. Closed, I shouldn't say closed not at all, but even though closed means closed, so technically that is correct, but it's misleading. It is restricted, as you all know already. But allies are lining up. But are they? Well, it's from the New York Post, so I imagine we can take this with a pound of salt. But if you read through it, it says, over the weekend, the United Arab Emirates and Australia became the latest to join the growing list of nations, now numbering 22, offering their help to open the strait. Now, that's not the same as saying, so Trump tried to start a coalition of ships to guide ships through, which everybody denied. And last I checked, they all said no. Now, what this seems to be trying to claim is that they're agreeing to it. Now, that's not what I'm seeing right now, but who knows what happens tomorrow, or this on the 24th, but where it goes, right? The point, to me, is that they're saying they're offering to help. Not that they're going to work alongside Trump to militarily guide ships through the strait, which is what they kind of want you to think is happening here. It says 6, United Kingdom, France, Germany, Italy, Netherlands, and Japan jointly declared their readiness to contribute to appropriate efforts to ensure safe passage. That's not the same thing. See, that's the same thing the UK said. No, that's dangerous, and we're not going to do that. But we'll seek a viable alternative. So they want clearly Trump not to be mad they're not helping, but they don't want to do the thing he said. That's what I feel is the case here. And now this is being framed sort of like the rest of the lies we're getting as somehow something that it's not. That's my sense on it. It says the Brits have also agreed to let U.S. forces use their bases to launch attacks, which by that logic, that now means they're a belligerent. And probably already were in Iran's mind, but at this point now, they would be legal targets in this ongoing military campaign. And NATO Secretary Mark Rutte says the alliance is working out a timeline for a joint response. It says if Iran would have the nuclear capability together with the missile capability, then it would be a direct threat. I'm just so tired of this argument. You mean like every other government and the ones that are literally committing genocide and they're not even seeking nuclear weapons? The same old thing. But this is NATO, which basically is the U.S. government, if we understand the reality. An existential threat to Israel, the region, to Europe, is the stability of the world. No kidding, says the totally not objective New York Post. Iranian leaders following Tehran's launch last weekend of 2 missiles at the joint U.S.-British military base, Diego Garcia, a stunning 2,500 miles away. I don't know why that's such a big deal to these people. It says a range far longer than Iran's missiles were supposed to have. Well, they're not arguing they don't have that capability. They're just not demonstrating what they do have. They've kept it close to the chest for this reason for a long time. The argument that they didn't have that was something the U.S. kind of spun as, should they cross that line, it's a big deal and we're terrorism. It's no different than any other government as far as I could tell for the most part. Different levels of reach, but the point is the same, is that they have the ability, or they could. Do you think Israel has shown you everything they're capable of right now? No. Tehran unilaterally struck out at the Gulf nations. Unilaterally. That's what this ridiculous platform just said. Tehran unilaterally struck out at the Gulf nations. Oh, you mean the nations that literally bombed them first and they responded because they were belligerents? Inflicting serious damage on their key means of income, their oil facilities. I mean, you just can't take people seriously like this. So they unilaterally? In what world are you operating in, guys? This means this writer was deliberately misdeceiving you for the team. Or they somehow just don't understand what everybody else has already seen. How embarrassing! But the point for me is the idea of this attack on the base. I want to remind you of something that James Lee put out. We'll play that really quickly, which I think is relevant about this exact conversation.
A few days ago, we were told that 2 ICBMs were fired at Diego Garcia, which is a joint US-UK military base in the southern Indian Ocean. Now, the Israeli military very quickly claimed that Iran fired these missiles and that they could soon hit Europe, including cities like Berlin, Paris, and Rome. Prime Minister Netanyahu then tweeted out, quote, "I asked the leaders of the free world, what are you waiting for? Israel is not only fighting for itself, but fighting for all of you." But there's just one problem. Iran says they got nothing to do with it. And if you read the Wall Street Journal reporting critically, it said that one of the missiles failed mid-flight, so it didn't even get there, and the other may or may not have been intercepted. So we really have no idea what actually happened. The US's own intelligence indicate that Iran lacks the capability of firing any missiles outside of about 1,200 miles. Now, Diego Garcia is located in the southern Indian Ocean, about 2,500 miles away from the nearest point in Iran, so something is not adding up here. Okay, the UK has now publicly come out to say that there is, quote, no assessment to substantiate Israel's claim that Iran has long-range missiles capable of hitting London. The NATO Secretary General said they have no evidence that Iran fired missiles at Diego Garcia. So if that's really the case, that Iran didn't fire those missiles, then the elephant in the room, of course, is who did. So
obviously it's hypothetical, right? But it's a fair point. And with everything else we're seeing, with all the weirdness around this, it's worth asking if we're being misled. Now, that's not to say, this is the important point, that Iran's not capable of that. I kind of find that irrelevant with what I just said in the first place. Not irrelevant, but just not what they're making it out to be. The question, though, is, are they? And that's still fair. I would argue I think it's worth arguing they are. But then, they're claiming they weren't. So the question is, if they aren't, was that fake by them to make that case? Or even if they are, was it still driven into reality? So the U.S. and Israel, right after they stress why that can't happen, suddenly goes, "Oh, look, I told you. We proved that means they're terrorists somehow because we told you that thing can't happen. Now that it's happening, terrorism, even though it's not." You see what I'm saying? It's an interesting thought, worth considering that. And especially since this is something they keep dwelling on. This is what Trump just said. One missile went 2,500 miles. They supposedly didn't have that. Like, it's a weird, they're really trying to push this in, even though, as I said, it seems largely.
And I think we've been proven right. They took one missile, went 2,500 miles. They supposedly didn't have a missile like that. They had no missile with that capability.
They didn't say that. You see, what do you mean they're supposedly? Did Israel tell you that? Was those the State Department Iranian experts? Israel, they never claimed we don't have that. Not that I can tell. Why would they? It's just a weird way to frame that. Like, it's about, they weren't supposed to bomb back. They weren't allowed to, it's like that video where he said they weren't supposed to do that. It's like, what is this, kindergarten? Like, what do you mean there's a plan? Israel. That's what it was. They thought they had a plan.
But they shot the now famous Ireland, the island that the UK was very afraid to give us. Because they didn't want to get dragged in. But we don't want to get dragged into their wars either. One thing, we're very disappointed. I'll say it publicly. We're very disappointed with NATO.
It's just something about him with NATO. It's just weird. Like, it's something about him. It's just sort of like, it's almost always performative. I don't know. It's hard to like put a word on, but it just feels weird. It's like, what are we like? What's the game being played right now? You know what I mean? Like, it's definitely not what's really happening. But here is one more statement. Actually, let me play this I've randomly just grabbed this because let's watch together since we're not too long, but late anyway. But let's play this since I was just checking out this as I was playing his other one. Here is a clip that I haven't seen yet. Let's see what James Lee has to say. And the point is, it looks like a fake terror cell, he's arguing. That ultimately it looks like the argument, and I can just grab it actually real quick. Here's the post. So he says he dug in to the Islamic movement of the people of the right hand, the Iranian-backed terror cell that has allegedly been committing attacks against Jews in Europe this past month. And this is what he was able to find.
UK intelligence believes Iran may be behind the arson attack on 4 Jewish ambulances in North London. So what do we know about the group claiming responsibility online?
Report put out by the Israeli National Center for Combating Anti-Semitism, and they say that this militant group emerged out of nowhere and had no known operational history before this month. Now, I find that to be a little bit odd. The Telegraph also reported that up until 3 weeks ago, there was no entry in any counterterrorism database. There's no Telegram channel, no social media footprint, and no history. Once again, very odd for a supposedly very dangerous and sophisticated sleeper group. And to date, the only news organization that this new sleeper cell that's allegedly out to target US and Israeli interests worldwide has officially spoken to is CBS News, which is the newly minted Israeli propaganda outlet that is run by Barry Weiss, an Israeli Mossad agent, allegedly. And this detail is a little bit interesting. They say that, quote, CBS News spoke to the administrator of Ashab al-Yamin's Telegram channel, who exchanged a series of messages writing in American English. Hey, maybe they use ChatGPT. I don't know. On top of that,
that usually indicates, guys, that, like, you know, remember the white helmets and that whole scam. Vanessa and I many times pointed out how ridiculous it was that every time their vests were written in English, the things they posted and why would that be if they're a Syrian organization? Because the propaganda was aimed at Americans. Simple. And it's the same point with a lot of these things. It's like, why would that be the case? Well, maybe it's something else, or maybe it's because they just wanted to make sure that we were the ones scammed by this, because we're the ones being told we might have sleeper cells in the United States. Even though that was, that story we already covered that reality, or at the reality of that story, which was basically a hyped story based on nothing other than Israeli intelligence says, or the idea that the original report that came out was somehow suppressed by the Trump White House. The whole thing felt very contrived to me.
Mint Press News noted that the group had used some language that they called unusual for a Muslim group, specifically referring to Palestine as the land of Israel. But it actually gets even worse. According to the International Center for Counterterrorism, they say that the Arabic inscription beneath the group's logo includes multiple mistakes, including the misspelling of the word Islamic. Seriously? They misspelled Islamic in the logo? And there's a little bit more, okay? The ICCT also found that there were a number of inconsistencies in their Telegram account, foremost the misspelling of the Arabic channel name, likely resulting, they say, from an incorrect English translation. Come on, this is too much, man. I don't know for sure whether this is or isn't a legit Iranian sleeper cell organization, but let me ask you, what is more likely, that they would commit a bunch of these misspellings and typos of a language they're supposedly proficient in, or maybe, just maybe, this is all a big psyop?
It's just wild. That's I like I said, I hadn't seen that. That's just the idea, and because that's the case, make sure you do your due diligence, guys. But the interesting point, this is something that I've heard, the statement of the group and so on, but I haven't gone too deep. But the point about this is that you could have the mistakes. What does that sound like to you with what we've continued to see out there? What kind of propaganda does that feel reminiscent of the kind of flailing, like 3 different styles of the same argument at the same time, and you get to pick which one you like? This is just lazy, guys. And I don't understand why this is I genuinely don't understand why that would be the case. Are they not capable of doing it? Do they want you to see that? I don't know. It's just, somebody says, I'm tired in the chat. I'm just incredible where we are and how ridiculous it all is. Let's not forget the age of 5th generation warfare. That's what we are in. And that's something that they've been telling with their dancing army videos, with their weird ghost masks. And they're telling you we're in this. Drones, fog, false flags, and political destabilization. That was a show we did on January 2025. Remember that Cybertruck blowing up in front of Trump Tower and all the, it's just psyop or psyop. Now, Saeed Abbas Aragachi the foreign minister of Iran, says the U.S. backed Israel's Gaza blockade, cutting aid under security claims, yet condemns Iran for defending itself in the Strait of Hormuz. Double standard. Israel's crimes are okay, while Iran's defense against aggressions is condemned. International law is not a tool of convenience. Now, look, you can argue he's a terrorist. You can disagree with everything he has to do, but the statement is fact. No matter what you think, you could write that anywhere you want, and it would be fact. Doesn't matter who says it. It's real. I mean, the obvious reality of that. And what they started wasn't a war of aggression. They're illegally started. I mean, everything about it. It's not about sides. That's simply the truth. Now, Pepe Escobar writes something important here. He says they're going for Larek in regard to the islands, a small island from where the IRGC Navy watches the tankers who paid the Strait of Hormuz toll, and arguably where they might be kind of able to lob out, but there's a lot of places they could do that. And says Karg Island is a diversion. It's too far away. His option 2 would be Abu Musa, to the west of Hormuz, with the help of the UAE. The consequence, Iran turns the UAE to dust. Now, what's important is Robert made this, the discussion about, made the point about any of the islands and how that might work out. Actually, I'll grab that for you in case you want to read it. And then we can wrap up for the most part here. Robert put this out. It's a good article. Here, it's right down here. Or it should be. What? Oh, man. I got to get this site updated. There's been some weird stuff going on with the background. Well, it should be right there. Oh, well, here it is up top. Like I've been saying, I'm just dragging my feet because there's a lot going on. We will be updating this and revamping some stuff. Not necessarily because I want to, just because it's long story. Things we kind of got trapped with our old terrible people that work with for the website stuff, and are now we have to because things will end up starting having problems. But strategic failure. Trump's contradictory Iran strategy unravels. And by the reason I said that, by the way, is just be aware that there's going to be some, visual changes and so on. But this is an important article. He does a good job breaking down. Now you can read. Here's the one I was talking about. Hormuz is closed only for Zionists. That's him. That's Argachi. But he gets into the point of the islands. You can read it. It's a well thought out argument. And so his point, again, back to Pepe Escobar, was simply that, with the UAE would be, at least in regard to this island, Abu Musa, the UAE would have to help. And the consequence would be them being turned into dust, bombed, right? Well, as it turns out, the UAE UAE rejects ceasefire with Iran, demands Tehran's full threat network be dismantled first. Ambassador, basically just sides with the United States publicly, also reaffirms a staggering 1.4 trillion UAE investment commitment in the United States. And as George Galloway says, they're committing national suicide. Seems to be a common opinion. But who's to say why? Maybe they're not in control, which is kind of what I think about these governments right now. But either way, just recognize that this is going further. Despite the Trump claiming we made a deal already or it's over. It was done on day one, right? But, not at all. Now, here's Vance trying to convince you that somehow these are all terrorists and that, we can't let them have a nuclear bomb because they might have a nuclear bomb vest. I mean, they're grasping at straws right now, guys. And this is what the Bulwark wrote. Vance suggests Iran could have used nuclear suicide vests. Oh, well, then he just quotes it. I'll play it for herself. Or I thought I had it. I guess not. And then I'll play one after this that I think is important that you've seen. Let's see. Okay. So the reason he's saying this, though, and it's a bad argument because the idea of a nuclear suicide vest is a little bit, I mean, if it's even possible, which I'm sure it is today, it goes a little bit beyond just what anybody could do anywhere. And I just think it's an extreme with the limitations of the enrichment. I mean, everything. All it's doing is trying to convince you that these are just monster terrorists. And, and that's the argument. You could make that argument. We can't let them have silverware because, you could just go ridiculous with they're terrorists. Therefore, it all makes sense. So the idea of just the suicide vest is just to make it into some hyperbolic argument. Why would that be the case? Well, because they're terrorists. Why wouldn't they just bomb you? Right? Because they're terrorists. Like that's just, there's no logic to it. And in fact, Iran has not had a previous history of doing what you're claiming. Even when you get into like the roadside bomb conversation, they're talking about IEDs, and that's largely because of the I mean, it's the same story, guys. But either way, Here is, if I can find it again. Where was that? There we go.
Say options. I think it's important the American people know options for what? And it's options to ensure that Iran never has a nuclear weapon. You talk about people.
See, he starts with the options. Like they're talking about right now, like we're deploying troops and we need options to make sure they don't have nuclear weapons. The one thing that we all seem to know, the evidence does not suggest, or that you guys know the IEA said it's not there, or that Gabbard told you as state. I mean, just ridiculous. At what point can we, realize that what we're saying is all of the evidence says it's not there, but we just are going to tell you it's there anyway. We just know. But your intelligence says otherwise. Well, yeah, we don't care what the intelligence says, even though that's what you always tell us what matters, right? Well, you're listening to Israel then. Okay, that makes sense. So you are being played by Israel if you look at it that way.
You walk into a crowded supermarket and have a vest on, and they blow up the vest, and a couple of people get killed, and that's a terrible tragedy. What happens when what's on the vest is not something that can kill a couple of people, but can kill many, many tens of thousands of people?
Well, that already exists. It's called a bomb, guys. I mean, what are you talking about, man? Well, if you want, and again, you want to make it into a nuclear conversation, again, it's just, this is irrational, the way he's framing this.
That is the most important American national security objective that exists for any administration at any time, is you don't want the worst people in the world to have a nuclear weapon. That's
too late. Because you guys are doing this, and because Israel's clearly able to have nuclear weapons, and because plenty of other countries that are far, 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 far less demonstrably dangerous based on their actions in the world than Iran have nuclear weapons. North Korea, for crying out loud. But yeah, this is what you like. Think about that statement and then ignoring that North Korea has nuclear weapons. It's just, these are a joke, guys. These are not serious people. They're manipulators. And to understand that the very point of these kind of vests and the idea of this stems from Zionism.
I mean, certainly the Zionists have used it and brought it, in fact, to the area. Terrorism, as we know it today, the planting of bombs in marketplaces and so on and so forth, was, in fact, introduced into the Middle East by the Zionists in the 1920s. But the net result of Zionist terrorism and violence in the first third of the 20th century has brought forth, to my mind, the anomaly, the horrific and unacceptable status in the Middle East today of the State of Israel, which is, in fact, an armed garrison state, which now exports more arms and distributes violence all around the world, vastly disproportionate to its size. I mean, in that respect, I think it's a horrible cycle of violence. But in it all, I think the Palestinian is the victim. There's no question about that.
Now, we're going to end with some points that back that up about what Israel's doing in the world today. But first, I'll include this for you guys to check out the idea of what they're claiming, right? The 60% that Witkoff's told you they bragged about. Well, on that point, the IAEA Director General addressed that, stating that Iran's uranium stockpiles remained under safeguards in accordance with their safeguard agreement. Literally the 60% that he claimed right there. Here's the document. You can read it for yourself from the Director General. That's my point, is that you can keep yelling, they have the bomb. Well, that's not what anybody anywhere says that is in a standing position to make that case. You guys are just lying. And now what we're being reported that the bombings that took place in Iran were also elements that were dropped that were mines, claiming that they were what they say electromagnetic mines, I guess. Not familiar, but the point is that this is being pretty broadly reported, so it's something you should consider. Now, it's also possible that Iran did this to themselves. I just don't see how that makes sense, but anybody's capable of, doing something to create a situation where you can justify that you were attacked. My point is, though, not that they're not capable of that, but why would that make sense right now? They're already being illegally attacked. They don't need to create other justification. They're using cluster munitions. They're using white phosphorus. They already are doing all those things, right? So this is on top of that. And the allegation is they're dropping mines in civilian locations. It's not hard for me to believe this is happening with what they've always done. Here's another example. And you even have them. There's actually multiple reports from different news agencies on the ground showing you. Like I said, you could argue Iran did it, right? But I don't believe that. Just because of the logic of it, not that they're not capable of it. Another war crime by the U.S. military. Explosive packages have been dropped throughout the city. And this is my point. This is not Gaza. There's people, phones, news agencies. And if you're just going to argue that literally everybody in Iran is a lying, deceiving person like you tried to claim about Gaza, well, you're disgusting. And it's not true. And also, I thought you were trying to save them, right? How's that work out? The people who run Iran are religious fanatics, says a religious fanatic. Looking at what they're doing. Oh, what's that? What's that, Rubio? attacking embassies and hotels. Imagine what these people would do if they had a nuclear weapon. They just can't stop. You have to realize these three people are some of the most radical people in the world, if you really understand what's going on, especially the two sitting by him. Like radical, like alarmingly, guys. He is literally a religious Zionist who is screaming about Armageddon. He's telling our own military this is for the end times. I don't know why that is not the end of the conversation. But yeah, keep telling us, Rubio, about how Iran is bombing civilian locations, because that's what he's claiming. Unlike them, we're hitting military targets. U.S.-Israeli attacks have already hit 281 medical centers and 498 Iranian schools. Widely reported, by the way, and I already reported it on myself, the very first attack, they came out with 175 murdered children. And everyone's admitted that essentially now. The U.S. reporting has come out. Hegseth put a map out that showed you that. Even Israel blamed the United States. But yeah, we'll keep telling us about how it's just broken, guys. Dropsite News, however, reports that Iran is striking chemical locations where the U.S. government and Israel are making white phosphorus. See the difference? Now, you could argue that there's plenty of other crimes happening. I just don't believe that that's the reality of the way it's going down, not because they're not capable, but because there's no justification, or rather, in their minds for why that would be in their interest. And they don't need to do that right now. But I could be wrong, of course, and question it. Trump says Iran war to last 4 or 5 weeks, but, could go far longer. Sure, why not? Brian Grimm, again, points out, Israeli media reporting that Netanyahu expects a ceasefire announced this Saturday. Translation, ground invasion comes this weekend. I certainly hope not, but I agree with his logic. And he follows up by saying, source tells him that the naval special warfare teams were also given deployment orders yesterday. This was on the 25th, as well as a bunch of tier 1 operators. That plus the 82nd Airborne deployment, plus Netanyahu's obvious feint pretending that they expect a ceasefire, which he's done many times, suggests that all the pieces are in place for yet another ground invasion. And what's crazy is he's probably right, guys, because they do the same thing every time. I guess we'll find out. Now, to the point of where terrorism seems to stem from in the world, let's make sure we understand this on the way out. Okay, this is just a quick little glimpse of what they're doing in the last 24 hours, and it's all over the world, and it's just blatant human rights violations, crimes, torture, terrorism. Here's Mike Huckabee, though, the America First Mike Huckabee, who wants you to believe that, we just haven't programmed the youth properly to believe what Israel is.
But where does that come from? There's a difference between dumb and ignorant. Dumb is that a person cannot process information. They just don't have the capacity. They don't have an operating system, if I put it in computer language. Ignorance is that the data isn't there. What we're dealing with is not an operating system problem. It's a data problem.
Right.
We have not downloaded the proper data, the true data into the minds of younger people.
For example, that they're not committing a genocide. For example, that, the Judaism is Zionism. For example, that they have a right to all of the land everywhere, as he even told Tucker Carlson. Right? That's the right information that you need to be programmed with in computer language, of course. And that's what he wants for America First, Trump's administration, is for American kids to believe that Israel has the right to rule over the world. And for Israel, this is what they're yelling out loud. And this guy believes. I've talked about this. This guy is ardent Zionist, very passionate about it. And if you haven't seen his discussion with Tucker, I'm not even know why they allowed him to do that. It'll blow your mind. This is the opposite of America First, and Tucker called it out himself. And we got booted off. Hold on. Now I got to set everything back up again, get the camera back. There we go. Welcome to Last American Vagabond. If you haven't been here, we get, this happens to us every other show, it seems, with a direct connection and fiber. But let's keep going. Almost done anyway. Let's see where we were. Okay. So back to the point. Mike Huckabee's explanation for why young Americans hate Israel. We simply haven't programmed them with the youth correctly. Now, however, they put that in quotes, and that's not what he said. So typical. Oh, I hate that that's happened on the platform, but everyone seems to do that these days. Don't do it, because you're making it seem that's what he said. He didn't say that, but that's what he meant. And I agree with that. But here, as Saul Rod points out, are Western media outlets going to report this, or are they going to still pretend it's the ceasefire? Well, guess what? Israeli army carries out airstrikes on tents sheltering displaced Palestinians in Gaza Strip, despite the U.S.-backed ceasefire. But remember, they don't care about that. They're bombing Lebanon. They're bombing Gaza. They're also bombing Iran during a supposed point. Guys, this is what they do. But realize they're bombing tents. There's no denying that, guys. They're not even claiming this is some kind of operation. They're bombing random tents full of people what's the word I'm looking for? In a refugee camp. There it is. I mean, it's just so crazy to me that we can't be real about what these people are. And I'm talking about the Israeli government. They're literally choosing to just randomly murder a bunch of people in tents. And they're not talking about it. They're not going, we just killed terrorists. They're wanting to make sure we don't look. They're taking advantage that we're focused somewhere else and murdering innocent, starved people. Yeah. And then every other day after that, by the way, and every other day before it doesn't stop. Here, Alan McLeod points out what Sky News is reporting. Palestinian teenager was starved in prison before death. Judges rule in Israel. Oh, by the way, starved by whom, right? Doesn't say. Guess we'll just have to guess. Palestinian teenager starved in prison before death. Judge rule. Great job, Sky News. It's sort of like New York Times and all the rest, how it becomes some kind of like ambiguous reporting when it happens when Israel's involved. And also, let's realize that almost every time this happens, the judge like this, they can rule that he died in prison, then no charges come out. No one goes to jail. Same thing here. Zachary Foster. UN experts demand Israel release prominent Gaza doctor after reports of severe torture. Yeah, that's March 25th, 2026, guys. That's right now. Oh, did you think that was over? Do you think they were the hostage? No, that's not over. As Zachary Foster rightly points out, no, we stopped hearing about the hostage crisis because all of the hostages were Palestinian. Now, the only ones that are left are Palestinians, so they just stopped talking about it because the only thing they ever cared about was Israelis, apparently. Not even the Americans that got killed and died and never got rescued from inside of Gaza, like we reported in the very beginning. That they apparently never left. I showed there was a woman from Chicago, not some dual citizen, Americans that lived there, not like it should matter more. And they never helped. They sure as hell did everything they could to help the Israelis, right? But think about that. The America First administration let them die. Or rather, either one of them, really, if you look at it. But the point is that clearly they don't care about these Americans. Or in Trump's current, which one was it? Yeah, no, it was this. It was this overlap from Biden to this one. And it was the American citizen that was being held in Israel, and nobody cared. And tortured, lost like 50 pounds. And it never stops, guys. And that's not America first, is it? It's not, they don't care about Americans first, clearly. Here, Israel's launching a genocide against Lebanese people during the supposed hold on bombing, even though it's not happening. They literally dropped pamphlets saying they're going to destroy Lebanon like they did Gaza. It literally says what we're going to do is going to be like Gaza. And that's the whole, but they drop pamphlets, guys, like Lindsey Graham. That's the difference. They drop pamphlets. And half the time they drop pamphlets that says, we're going to bomb in 3 hours over here. And then in 40 seconds, they bomb right where they are. Not making that up, by the way. I've seen many examples of them literally doing that. And that's been reported by UN, like people who are from an international level. I mean, this has been covered broadly. I covered this many, many times. And the points they drop these things, like look in the very, very beginning. What was one of the first things we saw and reported on? Even this was from the UN. They bombed the Egyptian crossing when they started to cross. It's the same thing every time. We have to be honest about that. Mass grave at Al-Shifa. This is February 24, 2026, which we knew. It's just another one. One of 126 mass graves holding hundreds of civilians, victims of the genocide, according to the Euromed Human Rights Group. It's not a secret, guys. They murdered all these people and they buried them and then tried to cover it up. Now that they're able to show it, people can see it. Sarah points out, it's horrifying. Paramedics in South Lebanon are forced to choose between saving lives or staying alive. Why? Because they're currently doing double taps all over that place. It's just exactly what we just reported. As Glenn Greenwald pointed out, it's been going on for decades. They literally bomb a location full of civilians, and then when these medical people rush in, they bomb even more. It's a tactic. It's on purpose. It's a horrible war crime. Here is the Israeli member of Knesset saying on the killing of the Palestinian family in Jenin, which just happened, quote, there are no innocent civilians in Jenin, no innocent children. I support IDF soldiers in every situation, even in the cost of children or women. Yeah, normal stuff, right? Just the normal everyday March 25th statements from Israeli politicians. Every child's a terrorist, kill them all. Normal stuff. Here's Blakely showing a video we've shown before. This guy's saying, in the maternity ward, 300 terrorists were born. Interviewer says, well, they're children, not terrorists. And he goes, no, they're terrorists. This is Amit Halavi from the Israeli Knesset. I mean, yeah, I've played all of these for you guys, and these are very real, verifiable. I just wanted to make sure you understand who we're actually dealing with in case you haven't seen it. Now, just a quick wrap-up point. Dropsite News reported that New York Times investigation raises serious questions about a March 6th airstrike. Remember when Hegseth told you he's now bombing narco-terrorists on land? And I talked about this. And it's after they started the whole weird Kristi Noem sort of Shields of America thing, and they pretended that started some kind of focus on the land. Well, they just kept bombing ships in the water, too, and they tried to pretend like it was part of some coordinated plan. Well, guess what? The U.S. said it bombed a drug camp. Turns out it was a dairy farm. I mean, this is being widely reported, guys, and we're innocent people, families, a dairy farm. The target, according to the New York Times, appears to have been a 350-acre cattle farm with dairy farm in San Martin. Farm workers, including a 32-year-old carpenter, Miguel, who owns a farm. I mean, what do you think? Do you think they just are that stupid or that belligerently incompetent, or they just don't care, or just were they get played by somebody else? I don't get it. We either got to start acknowledging this as people who actually care about what we pretend we are in this country and what we can be, or I guess we just give up, because I don't know how in the world, and that's not what I think, because I don't know how we can pretend that this is not happening in real time all around the world, and it is literally turning people against even us, by the way, as individuals. When you wonder why people say death to America, why they might be feeling that way. And even then, they still make it clear, look, we're talking about the government. And honestly, if you want to step back from that and realize, like Iranians, I find it strange even because of that, but they seem to have a very positive opinion of Americans. And I'd like to believe it's because of people like us, and because that's the majority from people looking in, that there's a lot of us going, whoa, this is crazy. And that's why I keep calling out that most people are seeing through the partisanship. Most people are beginning to question this stuff. Time to start recognizing that, guys, because we have an opportunity. And this is, and clearly they're trying to destroy that opportunity and everything else with it and everybody else around it, no matter what. And it's just sad that it's so obviously influenced by the very people. I mean, it's like, what do we need to convince people of? That they're not, that the genocide is not somehow influenced, that it's only over there that they're committing genocide. It's only in that one location that they rape people, or it's so obvious what we're dealing with. And again, I think the world has come to terms with that. It's about whether we can do something about the structure here that doesn't seem to care. Never calling for violence, never, but doing something is clearly necessary. So thank you for tuning in today. My plan will be to not work tomorrow, but I guess we'll see what happens with whatever goes on in the world. But thank you for tuning in. Appreciate your support. I love you all. As always, question everything. Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.